Good morning, everybody. Austin Farrell here, and this is my comic strip introducing Piaget, Jean Piaget versus Lev Vygotsky, and their theories that aren't necessarily competing but are pretty distinct from each other. And so we have our friend here, Jean Piaget, and Lev Vygotsky over here. And so the comic book strip starts with Mr. Jean Piaget explaining he's a Swiss cognitive psychologist, and his theory about cognitive development is the best around. And then next, Lev Vygotsky introduces himself and his socio-cultural theory, and he says it's much better, though not all realize it, because Jean Piaget's model is definitely more talked about than Lev Vygotsky's. And then Mr. Piaget goes on to explain his theory of cognitive development, and it describes how humans from birth to early adulthood attempt to build sort of this mental construct of the world that has discrete stages. And what these discrete stages include is reconciling experiences that they have in reality, what they see every single day, with whatever their current knowledge is, which, as a baby isn't much, but that's the main idea of the theory. And then Jean Piaget goes on to explain that, what is involved in this process of thinking is genetic epistemology, and this is sort of an attempt to study some of the origins of how knowledge is developed through the maturation stages. So where does it begin? How does it work? Those are all questions that Jean Piaget is trying to answer. But perhaps one of the most famous things that Jean Piaget is noted for, as he explains here, is that he organizes knowledge by things called schemas or schemata. And so this term, it kind of refers to how Piaget organized a mental structure as a whole, and schemata were these maybe units or categories of knowledge that connect to other schemas or schemata that form this cohesive mental structure. And so Jean Piaget goes on to explain here in the Canoe that schemas or schemata are involved in a couple different processes. And one of those is assimilation, which is the act of reconciling a new experience with a schema that already exists. And so this would include, maybe seeing something that you haven't ever seen before and trying to reconcile it with what you have already seen before. And then the second process is accommodation, which is seeing that new thing that you experience in reality, but then having to alter that pre-existing schema in order to make the two connect, to make sense of the two things, like the new experience and the pre-existing schema. And so through it all, he said there's this important force called equilibration, and I like to sort of look at it kind of like homeostasis with the body, where homeostasis regulates the temperature of the body. Equilibration is kind of this force that relieves the tension, between learning, or I guess the tension in reconciling a new experience with your pre-existing schema, and equilibration is sort of that relief that springs from making those connections and making sense of the two. And here is what Jean Piaget, right here, our hero in the Canoe, he explains is his most famous, and probably what he's mostly known for, is his stages of development. And this is where Lev Vygotsky and him really part ways mostly, is that Jean Piaget thought discrete stages of development were in place rather than constant learning through no particular stages. But we'll look at Piaget's stages first. And the first stage includes the sensory motor stage, and this is from birth to age 2, and what they learn mostly in this stage is object permanence, and basically understanding that when you have an object, the baby, from ages 0 to 2 sees that it's there, but when you put it behind your back or take it away, the the child somehow still knows that it exists. It's just behind your back. And then Piaget moves on to the second stage, which is the pre-operational one, occurring in ages 2 through 7, and it's usually characterized by I don't know if narcissism is the right word, but here I put egocentrism, which is they're less able to take the viewpoints of others into account. And so additionally, they make symbolic connections, sort of like when a child is riding a broomstick, they claim that they're riding a horse. They're able to make that connection that that broom is symbolically, categorized as a horse. So they're able to imagine, really, in essence. Then the next is the concrete operational stage, and this is from ages 7 to 11. This one is pretty distinct because Piaget noticed that this age is able to use logic to learn instead of just attempts, rather than just seeing or doing things to learn. People from ages 7 to 11 can really think things through and learn by processing that way. And they also learn the art of conservation, which is kind of the ability to distinguish a quantity even though there's an alteration in the physical appearance of some object. And then the last of these stages of the 4 is the formal operational stage, which is ages 11 on, from adolescence to childhood. And so it's sort of this idea that people can now logically or rationally extrapolate these obscure and abstract ideas. That's where you get into really deep topics that people can logically pull out and expand. And so Jean Piaget also believed in discovery learning, which is just learning through experience and active participation, not just simply dwelling and thinking, which has proved to be really, used through the school systems. We're going to talk about Vygotsky's sociocultural theory as well, but really this spurred so much, how would you say it, so much kind of like an enlightenment for the education system, because it made for some collaboration, but also seeing what children learn in these discrete stages and trying to emphasize in these stages what they will learn. As teachers, we can really aim closer to the goal if we know exactly what they can learn. All right, and then Vygotsky takes over in this scene right here, and he goes on to explain firstly his zone of proximal development, which is person's maximum cognitive potential, and it's reached through social interaction and collaboration. And this is probably his highest emphasis of Lev Vygotsky, is that learning occurs through social interaction. I want to talk a lot more about this, but I might not have time because I only got 15 minutes. But to reach this potential, Vygotsky highlighted scaffolding, which is sort of like accommodation, but you need a person that's more knowledgeable than yourself to scaffold and provide solutions to help you learn. And as effective scaffolding, as Vygotsky is so wildly explaining here in this frame, includes characteristics like you have to demonstrate the task, you have to model it, right, for another person. You have to make the task interesting but simple at the same time. And then while the person that you're teaching or providing scaffolding for, they might get agitated or frustrated. And so you have to be able to help them calm down and stick with the task. And then you also have to, as a scaffolder, have to highlight the facets that point towards a solution. So be that guiding force, really, that helps point towards a solution rather than looking at the problems and getting more frustrated. And so again, Vygotsky here so emphatically highlights that knowledge is shared through social interaction and collaborative learning. Now, the thing he also emphasized is that you have to have a variety of different intelligences among your peers, meaning that you can't have peers of the same intellectual level trying to collaborate with each other. They might get somewhere. Actually, I think they could probably get decently far, but having people collaborate in a range of ages and intelligences and experiences really provides for that higher learning. And then he goes on to say this theory includes reciprocal teaching, which is the collaboration between teachers and students. And so teachers will be those main scaffolders or the main people that provide that sort of accommodation that emphasizes things like summarizing in a story maybe and asking questions and clarification and maybe foreshadowing or prediction in a story. And so the point of this collaboration though is that a teacher will generally wean off of being in the discussion so that independent thought can happen by collaboration. You know, a teacher will gently just step away and become more and more quiet in order for the students to collaborate more and therefore learn more, which, you know, makes our job as teachers so much easier once the students can kind of figure things out themselves. And lastly, you know, we have Vygotsky doing his cartwheel and Piaget giving us a thumbs up saying they hope that we enjoyed their theories. And I also want to wish that you enjoyed this video and this comic strip. It was pretty fun overall, actually. I enjoyed making the frames and shifting the positions and making it animated. So